celebrate each other along the way. So that's what COIN is. It has a lot of groups in Oready 2, which is the biggest district, because we've had a Republican congressman for the last 4 years, almost 5 now, I guess. So there are a lot of people that stepped up and formed Indivisible. So that's what COIN is. It has a lot of groups in Oready 2, which is the biggest district, Margaret, because we've had a Republican congressman. Okay, Margaret, will you mute yourself so we don't listen to that? Okay, thank you. So we have a lot of groups across Oready 2, stretching from Jackson County. We're the largest district, I think, or second largest, I think, in the nation. Huge landmass there with a lot of invisible groups that go all across the eastern area as well. So tonight's meeting, our guest is Simon Rosenberg, and I'm going to introduce him in a minute. And our COINversations are designed for people that we feel are knowledgeable about politics, have ideas, or can report back to us on what they've learned and give us guidance and share with us their wisdom. And so we've had COINversations with candidates, with elected leaders, with Indivisible's organizations. Ezra and Leah from Indivisible National, the co-founders, have been with us on occasion. So this is just a chance for everyone to learn from someone who has been in the trenches. And with that, in the next 2 minutes or so, I'm going to introduce our guest speaker tonight. Mm-hmm. Everybody mute, please.
You all right?
Oh,
okay, all right.
Can someone mute? Thank you. All right. So we're going to let a couple more minutes go by, then I'm going to introduce our speaker tonight. And if you have questions about what COIN is or what it does, you can place them in the chat. Laura's going to be my fielder tonight. She's going to be watching for questions as we go along. And she'll be happy to get them to me or ask them for you. We're not going to be unmuting tonight because there's going to be so many people that it's going to be hard to have a full, oh, sorry, the cat's in the way. That's Zoom, right?
The cat Zoom.
Cat Zoom.
And we have good news out of Wisconsin, everybody.
We won.
Yay.
Yay, just called.
It's been a great day.
Both races or one?
Simon's the one that gave us the good news. I don't know the answer to that.
All I know is that we won in the Supreme Court. That's the one that I saw.
The Supreme Court race has been called, but the state Senate race, not yet. So, but it's looking good.
All right.
May I say so before we start real quick?
No, we're going to just really jump right in here in about half a second. Thanks, Jeffrey. We'll get to that at the end. We're streaming in here, so the
Terry,
Zoom world.
Muted. Terry, you're muted.
Terry.
How did that happen?
Maybe I muted you. Who knows?
Maybe I said too much. All right, so Laura, I'm going to have Laura start recording now at this point. Terrific. And I'm going to introduce our speaker tonight. Our guest tonight is a highly regarded political strategist and commentator with more than 30 years of experience in national politics and television news. He has advised elected officials and campaigns at all levels of government and across the country. And his commentary and insights have appeared regularly in the country's most important news organizations for decades. He's actually been a regular guest on Fox News for over 17 years, logging thousands of appearances on the Fair and Balanced television network. Last year, Simon received a great deal of notoriety for having been one of the only commentators who called the 2022 election correctly. He rightly forecast that a red wave wasn't coming and that it would be a much better outcome for Democrats than conventional wisdom held. Simon has worked closely with the Democratic Party, serving in senior roles in the DNC, DCCC, and working on 2 presidential campaigns, including a leadership role in the Clinton War Room in 1992. He was instrumental in founding the House New Democrat Coalition, the Donor Advisory Network, the Democracy Alliance, and was a leading candidate for DNC chair in 2005. But he recently turned his focus toward grassroots efforts like ours at Indivisible. And you can read all about it on his new Substack called The Hopium Chronicles, which I'm sure he'll talk about tonight. We'll put that in the chat, so you can please go there and subscribe after the meeting. Today's post on the Substack is all about how we should not obey in advance, which is pretty timely considering what's happening in Tennessee and Florida, and it pretty well describes our Indivisible work here in Oregon as well. So welcome, Simon Rosenberg.
Second. Thanks, everybody, and
Right.
thank you. Can you hear me okay? And it's late here on the East Coast. It's been quite a day, political day, a very rich and full political day, starting with what happened in New York. And then obviously we've had remarkably good news out of Wisconsin tonight. It looks like Chicago is going to go our way as well. And there's also some additional races in Wisconsin that we'll hopefully know about while we're here on this. I'm turning off my phone here to make sure it doesn't ring. And so it's a lot to celebrate tonight. I made calls into Wisconsin. Many of you may have done it as well. It's a huge victory. I hosted Ben Wickler, who's the dynamic party chair in Wisconsin, for a discussion this past week, and they were optimistic, but as we all know, you never know, right, until election day. So a lot to celebrate. Let's start off with, we're in a pretty remarkable political day. I think when we scheduled this, we had no idea how historic this would be. And I'm not going to talk much about Trump. I want to, it is what it is. We all kind of know what they've become. We understand that MAGA has replaced conservatism as the governing ideology of the Republican Party. We know that they've become dangerous and a threat to our democracy here in the United States. And it's why you're all here, right? You're all here because you're proud patriots and you love your country and you want to make sure that the opportunities that we all had are there for our kids and our grandkids. And so this is a time where people are standing up, and it's really just an honor to be here with all of you in the work that you do. And it's very meaningful to me to have the opportunity to be with so many people all around the country who are doing remarkable work. As part of the story, I'm not going to talk too long tonight because I'm a little tired. It's been a crazy day. I've done a tremendous amount of media today, and I'm a little talked out, but I'm going to just give you a few sort of top line observations, and then let's have a conversation. Is that I think one of the things that's been so inspiring to me, and why I created this Substack called Hopium Chronicles, which to me is a new piece of media. It's a new media. It's a new platform for us to try to find ways of better doing our work together, is because of the decline of Twitter and the right-wing noise machine that is so noisy in our discourse every day, that I've decided after many, many years of being an insider Washington Democrat that I was going to fight harder, actually. I mean, if I could really summarize why I'm making this big change in my life as a formerly young person, is that I felt that this next cycle, we really had the opportunity to not just beat Republicans as we've done in the last 3 cycles. We've had 3 very good election cycles in a row, and we should be really proud of it. In some ways, the results of 2022 may have been the most remarkable of all, and I'll talk about that in a second. But we all recognize that I think a lot of our orientation has been about just pounding it out, getting as far as we could, against them. But I think now the fact that Ron DeSantis has made it clear that both of the leading candidates for the Republican nomination are dangerous extremists, that this is not just something that's unique to Trump. This is a danger that's infected the entire Republican Party, that we need to think differently about how we're approaching this next election. We can't just have another election where we kind of get through the finish line and win by a few votes and just hold on to our 51 seat majority and hope that everything is going to be okay and that nothing goes bad. I think we have to really think about how we expand our coalition and get to 55% of the vote, not to 51% of the vote, and to really break MAGA's back politically and to start to end their dark grip on the Republican Party. And I think if I could just sort of speak to us as family, as Democrats in our family, we got down on ourselves last cycle. There was a pessimism and a frustration in our politics that was, to me, dangerous and self-indulgent, given the threat that MAGA represented. And part of what I did is that I went out and told a positive story about our party and about who we were and the things we were doing and our opportunities. And it was hopium, as some called it, but it was also grounded in data and reality. I mean, if you look back since 1989, when the Cold War ended and a new world was born, there have been 48 million jobs created in America since 1989. 46 million of those jobs have been created under Democratic presidents. Virtually all the gains in the stock market that have happened since 1989 have happened under Democratic presidents. Under 3 Republican presidents, we've had repeated recession, spiraling deficits, and American decline. Under 3 Democratic presidents, we've had job growth, strong GDP growth, rising wages, lower deficits, and American progress. And this fundamental contrast between their repeated failure and our repeated success, to me, is the essential thing that we have to work together to try to instill into the daily discourse. All of you know, because you're in it, you talk to your friends, we're all part of we're all sort of victims, in essence, of the right-wing noise machine and the stuff the poison they're pumping into our discourse every day. It's my belief that we have a couple of things we need to do together in this year to prepare ourselves for being in a position where we can have the kind of election that we want to have in 2024. First is we need to win the economic argument with the Republicans. We're having a big economic conversation. And as I pointed out, we've been very successful as stewards of the American economy. They've repeatedly failed. But in polling, they're ahead of us. People trust Republicans more in the economy than they do Democrats. We've got to fix that. That is, if I could wave a Harry Potter magic wand and do one thing in 2023, it would be to get us into positive territory on the economy. As you notice, Joe Biden is spending virtually all of his time traveling the country, talking about the progress we've made, the investments that we're making, how much better off we were than we were when he took office, and these historic investments that he's made for us going forward. And I think he really understands that this year we've got to win this big economic argument with the Republicans. Second is that I'm calling for us to launch a national voter registration campaign for young people. So much of our energy, our margin of victory comes from young people. We're regularly winning under 45-year-old voters by 10, 15, 20 points. And the thing is, though, that group, which votes the most for Democrats, also votes the least in our electorate. We should change that. We should do everything we can to increase the number of young people who are voting. And a stat that I just learned the other day, I didn't know this, but the voter turnout rate of under 45-year-old voters, of those who are registered to vote, is equal to older voters. It's just that they're registered less. So if we can increase the registration numbers of younger voters, right, who are plus 15 Democrat, we can really add a lot of points to our margin in 2024, not across the whole country, right? This is a universal demographic opportunity for us. And I've laid out in a memo that's on my Substack called Get to 55, a whole strategy about going on offense and expanding our coalition. And the very quick data on this is that from 1992 to 2004, we averaged 47% of the vote in presidential elections. Because we identified a new demographic cohort, too, Hispanics and millennials, who are overwhelmingly Democratic, and we invested a lot of money and built our politics around that, we've now averaged 51% of the vote in the 4 elections since 2006, when millennials and Hispanics hit critical mass. So we've already jumped 4 points at the presidential level. Now what I'm challenging the family to do is to get to 55 from 51, which is where Biden was last time. And the reason this matters also is that it gets to sort of what happened in this election and about how I think we have to change our mindset, right? We have to stop being in a defensive crouch and being critical of one another and the kind of loss of confidence and faith that we had in ourselves and our leaders and the American project that happened during this last cycle. In this last election, I'd like to say that today the Democratic Party is strong. Joe Biden is a good president. The country is better off. And obviously there's them, right? As a contrast to all the good things that we're doing, our opponents are among the most dangerous and crazy manifestation of American politics in all of our history, right? And I think it's why what I just want to come here and spend time with you as you look to the next 2 years, start from a place of thinking of going on offense, of being strong, of being confident, of growing from the amazing election performance we had in this last election. And frankly, the last 3 elections where we've, beaten the MAGA in the battlegrounds in 3 consecutive elections, and to really try to grow and expand and not reposition and not play defense. It's a mindset, right? It's a different way of thinking about ourselves and who we are. Since 1989, we've been the party that's made people's lives better. We deserve, we've done a good job. Joe Biden's been a good president. If any party is going to lead us forward, it should be us. And we should be confident in that sense that we are really offering something far better for the country than what they're offering. And so what I want to just conclude with is that what happened in 2022 in my battle against the red wave, for those of you who followed it, is that there were really 2 elections in 2022. There was a bluer election inside the battlegrounds where our candidates raised unprecedented amounts of money. We had muscular and strong campaigns, largely due to the work of groups like the group here tonight, not just your texting and your postcard writing and your phone banking, but also the money that was raised. We were outraising Republicans in the battleground in these key races by 4 to 5 to 1 in the actual campaigns themselves. And we're building the most muscular and biggest campaigns in the battlegrounds that we've ever had. And those campaigns allowed us to control the information environment, to create an unprecedentedly large GOTV operation. And in the battlegrounds, we didn't just do well. We actually gained ground from 2020 in Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, Minnesota, Michigan, New Hampshire, and Pennsylvania. Incredible achievement in an election that was supposed to be terrible for us. We actually, the most important states in the country, we actually gained ground, right? And it's thanks to all of you. It's because of the money that we're raising now, the unprecedented money, the power and passion of our grassroots, the work that everybody's doing. We're strong and muscular now. We have the strongest and most muscular grassroots in the history since I've been in this business in 30 years, right? The kind of things that sprung up like this during COVID, where we're now organizing over Zoom, where the barrier to entry for participation has been lowered so much, and all of you have this more meaningful relationship to politics. But the other thing that happened this election, the sort of not so good thing, was that outside the battleground, we lost ground. We lost ground in California and Texas and New York and Florida. And part of the reason why is that we didn't have those muscular campaigns where we could control the information environment and overwhelm the power of the right-wing noise machine. And it's why what I'm arguing to all of you now, in addition to all the good work that you do in campaigns, the money you raise, the texting you do, the postcards you write, all the ways that you engage, we also need to add one other layer on top of that, which is we need to become information warriors. We need to get involved in the daily debate of our country, our discourse, and get louder collectively. They're louder than we are. We're better than they are, but they're louder than we are. We have to get louder, and becoming an information warrior, learning how to take facts and figures and the good works of the Democrats and spread it through your networks, not election time, but all the time, every day, the way that they do, is something that we have to learn how to do and become comfortable with. Some people will do it with more enthusiasm. I always joke that if you're going to do this, you have to be loud, but not be annoying, right? And with your friends and your colleagues to make sure you're not turning them off. But we have a loudness challenge in our family that we have to sort of acknowledge and understand and really organize around. And we can talk more about this in the Q&A, but I'm really confident that building on the remarkable work of what we all did together in 2022, as we just saw in Wisconsin, as we saw in Chicago, right? We have to go for it here. We got to roll the dice. We got to go big. We got to try to expand our coalition, not play it safe, and really do it for our democracy, for our country. Because if we can get to 55, I think we can break the back of MAGA and start to loosen its grip on the party of Lincoln and Reagan, and hopefully eventually have something like a traditional center-right party return here in the United States, and the threat of MAGA will be lessened. I think we all want to go back with our lives, right? We all want to get back and cook with our families and coach Little League or all the things that we do instead of doing this. Well, the way we do that is that we have to really, we have to not just win this election, we got to win big. And I think the tools are there. They've given us the tools to do it. We have to have the ambition, the confidence to do it together. And I think if we do, this can be a remarkable and historic election. So thank you, everybody. It's really great to be here with all of you tonight. Let's have a conversation. And I also just want to say one last time, thank you for what you do, for being, patriots and being here tonight, big citizens, giving a crap about your country, to take the time to be with me here tonight, and for all the work that you do in Oregon or in other states. If you do work in other states, thank you for that. It really matters.
Thank you, Simon. I'm going to kick off the Q&A with a question of my own. I know that after the Trump election, I felt like the Democratic Party was just broken into little tiny pieces. It felt like they were in mourning, both locally, statewide, nationally, and then it felt like they were trying to figure out who they were and how to pull themselves together. Do you think they've achieved that? Are we there yet?
I think we're much further along than we realize. I think we're hard on ourselves, right? I think that we are, I talk about something. I want to go through an exercise with you for a minute. I'm a former English major, and so just bear with me for a second. But I think we have to get better at speaking in declarative sentences. And what I mean by that is saying simple things like, Joe Biden is a good president, or Joe Biden has been a good president, period. No but, or no qualification, no, but he hasn't done this stuff well, or the Democratic Party is strong, period. Not the Democratic Party is strong, but what about this and what about that, right? It is amazing to me in the conversations that I have with Democrats, how the but comes out. And the but is what they do. What we do is we have to say what we've done and who we are. I mean, when I used to go on Fox and I was not paid, I did it as a volunteer for 17 years. I did thousands of appearances, all the big shows. I knew that it was going to be very adversarial, but I also knew that my opportunity was I would get 2 bites of the apple. I could say 2 positive things about Democrats, regardless of what the questions were. And I had those, canned and ready to go. I wrote them down on a piece of paper in front of me. Regardless of what the question was, I'd say, that's a great question, John, but I want you to know that Barack Obama's created a lot of jobs as president. And I would start with this positive assertion before I responded to their attack or their challenge. We have to stop doing Republicans' work for them. Every time that we use a but, or we talk about how we've failed to do X, Y, and Z, right? We are doing their work for them. They're very good at attacking us. We don't need to do that for them. Let's let them do that. The thing we have to do is to more affirmatively and positively state why we're the most important force for good in the history of the world, that the Democratic Party has created more opportunity for more people in the world today than any other political system in the history of humankind. Joe Biden has been a remarkable president. We have to live in our good works and sell them to the American people, because if we don't sell it to them, we shouldn't expect them to know it. And let me just make one other point on this. This is the thing I talk about a lot and write about a lot. A year ago, the last time I saw a major poll on this, there was a basic question that the Navigator poll asked of people, which is, do you think there were more jobs created in 2021 than in 2020, right? It's not a question about your feelings or how do you think about, it's like saying, is the sky blue or is the sky red, right? And in 2020, we lost 3 million jobs. And in 2021, more jobs are created than any year in American history, right? So this should be a pretty easy question. This is kind of a simple question. It's like, who won World War II, right? And only 20% of Americans in this polling knew that more jobs were created in 2021 than in 2020. And that's a problem, right? People don't know what's happening around them. They don't understand the country they're living in. And it's why I think that if we get louder, if we tell our story, if we focus more on being upbeat and positive and optimistic and full of hopium and all the things we talk about, I think it's going to be very powerful for us. I mean, I worked for Bill Clinton in 1992, and he always said that optimism was our superpower as Democrats. And I believe that. They're a pessimistic, MAGA is a pessimistic faith. MAGA wants you to believe that our country is bad, that our institutions are bad, that our leaders are bad, that we're bad, that America's bad, that we are bad, right? Together. Well, the way that we respond to their pessimism and their negative sentiment is with positive sentiment of our own. We have to do this, not because it's kind of goofy and fun and Simon said it. It's because it's about strategy. It's how we defeat them. It's being positive and upbeat and telling the story of America and the Democratic Party is the antidote to their pessimism and negative sentiment. And I think it's like a muscle we have to learn how to use more, because I think sometimes we're a little bit too pessimistic as Democrats. And I think we don't have the luxury of that over the next few years.
Thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Laura right now, who's been collecting questions in the chat. Laura, you there?
I'm here. Hi, Simon. Thank you
Hey,
for being
thank
here.
Sure.
So on the issue of messaging, and because this happened today, how do we message Trump's arrest and the upcoming trial? We've heard from a number of pundits today to take the high road, to ignore it. I mean, what do you recommend?
I don't think we can ignore I think the story of what's happened to the Republican Party is a story that we're obligated to tell to people. I think at every moment, as you think about these things, our obligation is to tell people the truth and to not sugarcoat things, to be honest with our fellow citizens about what we believe and what we think is true. That's our obligation in a democracy, right? And I think that one of the single most important story in American politics today is that one of our two major political parties has lost their way and become a dangerous force in the United States that has perhaps no antecedent in our history. And I think that in the he said, she said media, in the world of C3s and C4s where you can't be partisan, there's structural reasons why essentially acknowledging the sickness that has taken over one of our two political parties is uncomfortable, right? But it's a fact. It's like sky's blue, right? Like the Republican Party has become a dangerous and reckless force in our life. Ron DeSantis has reinforced that the MAGA disease is not unique to Trump. It's actually infected the entire party. And I would argue that Ron DeSantis in many ways is a more worrisome creature than Trump is. And I know we could debate that for a long time, but certainly, he's competing with Trump for awfulness and extremism. And we should not in any way minimize this. It doesn't mean though that we have to dwell in it and live in it, right? That's part of what I'm saying, is that I think that our obligation it's Joe Biden. What's he doing right now? He's running around the country telling everybody about all these investments that we've made and how much the country's better off. That's how we should be starting. And then when it comes to them, we have to be we have to tell the truth, which is that, they've become a danger to all of us and to everything that we care about. And sugarcoating it, downplaying it, minimizing it doesn't do anybody any good. And by the way, people in the battleground states know this. We've litigated MAGA now in 3 consecutive elections, and we've won these elections in the battleground states. The people in the battlegrounds know MAGA. And the Republicans have a big problem. I mean, part of my red wave analysis this last cycle was, the Republicans made this huge strategic error. I mean, people just voted against MAGA in overwhelming numbers in 2 consecutive elections. And usually when a party fails like that, they run towards a new politics. The Republicans doubled down on MAGA. It was unusual. It was a strategic error in my view. And it's one of the reasons we outperformed expectations. Well, they're doing it again, right? There's no way, we cannot allow them. If Trump ends up stumbling and doesn't make it as the nominee, however that happens, we can't allow them to put Trump into the memory hole, right? And flush him down into the memory hole and say, oops, no biggie, sorry about that. That was kind of a mistake. We've got to hold their extremism around their neck every day to create this bright contrast that I was describing. And so we can do both. We can tell our story about the good things we've done and, be ruthless in the way that we are describing the what they're doing. The Ron DeSantis could have run on a 15-week abortion ban. He's now passing a 6-week abortion ban. Ron DeSantis is about to pass some of the most inhumane legislation geared towards undocumented immigrants in the history of the United States. I mean, I can go down the list of these choices he's made in the last few months to become even more extreme and more dangerous. And so it does no good to anybody for us to downplay the significance of what we're up against here. And I think what I always come back to in all the years of my political commentary is that you just have to be truthful. And if you're truthful, then you're grounded, then you're believable, then you're authentic, and then you're not being a partisan, right? You're just talking about what you believe to be the case in simple, plain language. And I think they've given us enough ammunition to make it very clear that they're out of the mainstream and that regular old normie Americans, should be running away from these guys instead of embracing them.
Thank you. So I want to talk about voter turnout. In Oregon, 1/3 of our voters of the electorate are non-affiliated voters, and they can't vote in any of the primary parties, the Democrats, Progressive Party, what have you. So how do we increase turnout among those voters? How do we, I think there was a comment in the chat that they feel ignored and they're not part of the effort. How do we draw them in and get them to turn out to vote?
It's an interesting question, and it's very specific to Oregon. And I want to say that when I started the organization that I'm retiring this month, NDN, in 1996, one of the first things that we spent money on was we invested in the vote by mail experiment in Oregon in 1996. Bill Bradbury, who some of you may remember, reached out to me, and Phil Kiesling designed the vote by mail experiment in 96, which then became, I think, the first cycle where it actually happened was in 98, I think, my memory. But I was one of the first outside funders of your vote by mail system, and I believed in it as a way of making it easier. I'm a big believer in just lowering barriers to entry into our politics. As all of you know, we're one of the only countries in the world that even has voter registration. I mean, virtually no country. It's a very unique thing in the United States. I mean, most countries, you just go vote and you're on a roll and you're a citizen and you go vote, and there's no this barrier. I mean, imagine designing a political system where the time of maximum interest in politics is the only time you can't register, right? I mean, the whole system was designed to prevent people from participating. And so your state's been a leader in this for the nation. As you know, you have the highest voter turnout, I think, of any state in the country. And the question of unaffiliated is interesting, and it's very unique to your system. And the question is whether or not the unaffiliated voters should be allowed to vote in Democratic primaries, I guess, right? I mean, that's one of the ways. But I'm speaking here a little bit outside of my area of expertise, and I don't want to go too far. But I think it's a great question. I'd love to think about it, learn more about it. Happy to potentially write about it and share some thoughts, and maybe even gather Phil and some of the other folks in Oregon to have a conversation about it. Phil, as you know, is still working on the Vote from Home project all these years later. It's kind of amazing. And but I don't know. I want to say one thing about unaffiliated voters, because I think there's a little bit of there's some mythology about that. It is true that the number of people choosing not to affiliate with a political party is increasing, but the number of people voting truly independently is not increasing. Most independents are actually either Democrat or Republican, and they vote that way. They just don't affiliate with the party. And there really isn't a growing, Manchin and Sinema has talked about this, and the whole No Labels project is around this idea. There's this growing group of unaffiliated voters in the country. That's not true. Only about 10% of American voters are not Democrats or Republicans. What's interesting is that big chunks of that 10% are actually to the left of the Democratic Party and to the right of the Republican Party. So they're not in the middle. This idea that 10% is sort of sitting in the middle between the two parties, that's also not true. What is usually characterizing people who are unaffiliated is they don't like politics, and they don't like either party. and they're very kind of low information voters, and they don't vote that often. And so this idea that there is this sort of huge growing kind of unaffiliated cohort in the country, there, when you look at polling, sort of an insider thing here, if you ask the simple question, are you Democrat, Republican, Independent, you'll get about 30% will say they're independent, give or take. If you ask the question is, are you a strong Democrat, weak Democrat, strong Republican, weak Republican, and independent, that number drops down to 10%. And so the truly so there's some myth making around this issue of the rise of the independents, but certainly one of the ways this has been dealt with in other states is they open up the primaries for independents so that they get used to voting, with the party, and that you're welcoming them into your politics. As you know, parties don't always like that. They like to control, and this is often so. Many states in the country, if you're an independent voter, you can vote in either primary. That's very common. There are many states where that's not the case, like in DC, where I live. If you're an independent voter, you can't vote in either primary, right? And you have to affiliate with one party or the other. So that's just, but I'm open to learning more about this and engaging with you in this, but it's a great question and something you should be concerned about, because what isn't the case is that young people are affiliating. If you want to read sort of the person who writes about this most intelligently is John Della Volpe from Harvard, is probably the preeminent current academic looking at 18 to 29-year-old voters. He does a quarterly poll that goes back over years, and right now young people are more ideologically aligned with us than than potentially any time in modern history, but they don't necessarily consider themselves Democrats, right? And both of those things can be true at the same time, and it's it's an opportunity for us. This is why I'm talking about us launching an unprecedented campaign to bring young people into our politics, to make them feel welcome, to make sure they know they have a seat at our table, right? To make sure that young people are at the center of our politics, not at the kids' table, which is something I think we have work to do.
Thank you. So I wondered if you could comment on this scenario. There's some comments in the chat that many of us in the grassroots still don't feel like the Democratic Party supports us. We had a situation, you may be familiar with it, with our Congressional District 5 race in 2020.
Yep.
We had a challenger to the incumbent. She won, mounted a very strong campaign. The Democrats, of course, once she won the primary, got behind her. But then in the last weeks of the campaign, pulled funding, and many attribute her loss, Jamie McLeod Skinner's loss, to that. I don't know if that's exactly everything that happened, but that was something that happened that we can point to. There doesn't seem to be any real reason why they did that. Could you comment on that? And
I mean, I don't know the particulars. I don't know the actual decision making behind it. But look, my advice to all of you, as somebody who is a party guy and believes in the party, and I ran for chairman of the party against Howard Dean in 2005, and I came very close to winning that race. And I believe that in many ways we undervalue the centrality of the party apparatus as sort of the core machinery that we have, because by law, right, what's crazy is that there is an actual mandated duopoly in American law. The Democrat and Republican parties can do things that no other political actors can do by law, right? This is not by convention. I mean, essentially, it's why it's very hard to start an independent party in America, because there is an independent party isn't given equal status to the Democrats and Republican parties. So there is an actual functioning duopoly. And I think that you have to recognize is that the party has an obligation to win, and they're going to make decisions sometimes that you're not going to be happy with, and intervening in a primary or pulling and this is just the nature of life, right? This is the way it works. And the key is to establish and maintain strong, respectful relations, to make sure the doors are open, to have a hearing, to get a hearing, and to understand, knowing that you're not always going to agree, right? We're a big, complicated, dysfunctional family. We're not always going to agree on everything, but we don't have to allow that to become rancorous. And, But it's really important for there to be open communication, and honesty and respect among all involved, right? That's the most important thing. One of the reasons I'm doing this with you tonight is that I'm aware that there's been an explosion of groups like this since COVID happened, and since MAGA happened, and since Hillary lost, and the remarkable number of people who run these organizations were, heartbroken and devastated by Hillary's loss in 2016. And I was a Clinton guy all the way back to 1992, and I know Hillary very well, and personally. And I think that the Democratic Party, I think, is unaware of how our grassroots has changed. And I see this as what you're doing as being part of the family, but you're not part of the party. And I think that's great, right? I think some people in the party, I'm sure all of you are aware, are not happy that you're creating kind of this independent thing from them. And that's okay too, right? To me, I'm sort of a believer into Tocquevillian understanding of democracy, right? Is that the greatness of this country is people taking individual initiative to go solve problems in their communities. And all of you are doing that. And I think that these groups that have sprung up, as you all know, you have ownership over these groups. You help build them, and they're very personal to you, and you've got your friends here, right? And you've created community. And I think that's amazing. This is a better politics than going and sitting in a crappy Democratic Party meeting where they're having votes on things that don't matter. I mean, we've all been through that, and it's horrible, right, to some degree. And so I think the Democratic Party has a lot to learn from all of you about the way we have to reorganize our politics to make it more accessible and open for regular people to, get involved. And I think this relationship should be a healthy tension, right? And if it ever descends into rancor and fighting, then they win, right? The Republicans win. And it's why we have to stay respectful, but you have to keep doing what you're doing. And I'm part of the reason I've done 8 meetings like this in the last few months. I've got another 10 to 15 scheduled. I'm accepting these almost every day, is that I want to lend my voice and my respect for your work to be here to say thank you and to encourage you to keep going, while I'll also work with the party because they have a different job than all of you do, right? And so you're not always going to agree, and that's okay. But it's to make sure that, your position, if they're not being respectful and listening to you, then that's a problem. And, you need to make sure that you try to work to keep the lines of communication open. I think that Democrats are going to start coming to an understanding that all these groups like your group here, this is our superpower now, right? This is what's raising all the money, and this is what caused us to win in Wisconsin. And, I made my calls the other day in Wisconsin. Some of you here, I'm sure, did as well, right? This ability to help a campaign wherever you live, not just to give money, but to make phone calls, to text, to write postcards. This is a big deal, right? This is a big change in the way we do our politics. And, we're stronger and better for it, and we have to keep encouraging it. And that's one of the reasons I'm here tonight, is to say thank you, and, keep going and keep working hard.
Thank you. I wanted to ask this question. It's kind of, I know that this is something that our group thinks about a lot. The idea of having candidates or educating people about creating what a pro-democracy culture should look like. And should that be part of the education process, part of the campaign process, as contrasting that to what an authoritarian government would look like? We don't hear a lot of that from candidates. We have heard a lot from President Biden about that. But do you think that's something that, in terms of messaging, that we should do more of?
Yeah, I mean, so look, we know from exit polling that was done after the election, that the 2 ways that voters really understood MAGA to be dangerous in this last election were the extremist abortion bans, the ending of Roe, and also the threats to democracy that manifested largely through these Secretary of State candidates and others on the ground in these battleground states. That people were motivated, that part of our strong performance was based on people having a perception that there was a threat to our democracy here, as well as a threat to our freedoms through the ending of Roe and the abortion restrictions. So I do think this is actually front and center in people's minds. I don't think this is, you're pushing against an open door, in essence. And this conversation, people are aware, I think much more aware of this than, doesn't mean they want to talk about it, doesn't mean that they want to spend a lot of time thinking about it, because it's a little scary, right? The way that climate change, spend too much time thinking about it can be a little scary, right? But I do think this conversation is healthy to have now, because it perhaps becomes a way for a new generation of people, or people that haven't really ever had to think about, well, could our democracy disappear, right? This is not something I've given a lot of thought to. I've thought a lot about other stuff, about how to make good chicken piccata or coach a little league team, and thought a lot about those things, but I haven't really thought about, man, what happens if we live in an authoritarian country? And so creating permission structures and spaces to have these kinds of conversations, I think, are really healthy. Because, you know, I talk about in my Substack that I do think that what's changed in our politics, I think we're entering a new period of American politics. I think there was a period from the late 1980s, early 1990s, where the Cold War ended, Clinton extended the American system to the rest of the world. And, you know, we were living in a period of very relative peace and prosperity, and American system was become, you know, the Chinese and the Russians and every country in the world became part of it. First time there'd been really a truly global economy, and sort of the American creed was winning out all around the world, and things were good. You know, they made, you know, the Iraq war was a mess, and we can get into it, but in general, you know, things were pretty good by historical standards. I think that era is now giving way to a new era. We didn't have a name for that last era. I call it the age of globalization. But I think we're entering a new era where there are now two existential threats that we face as a country, right? The planet is warming, and, you know, our democracy and democracies around the world are under threat, and by both foreign and domestic challenges. And I think that none of us are really expert in those kinds of battles. We fought other battles, and we have to become more expert and learn our language and understand how to talk about these things and develop opinions. I think one of the things that's going to happen with abortion is that there are a lot of people now who have to really think about it in a way they didn't really have to think about it before. Or if they thought about it, it was very personal for them and their partner. And now it's a question of, you know, I think particularly there are a lot of men who haven't really thought about this very much. And, you know, you could tell in the last election, because there were a lot of male commentators who embarrassed themselves when they talked about these issues, right, around abortion and reproductive freedom and all the things that are so essential now. And I have a personal belief that the abortion issue is, we've only begun to understand the potential power of this issue. We saw it in Michigan, you know, with Gretchen Whitmer's huge victory with the ballot initiative. We saw it in Kansas. In Kansas, where there were ballot initiatives around abortion in 2022, the Republican coalition collapsed, right? It fell apart, and we ran up the score in both Kansas and in Michigan. In Wisconsin, right, a state where the abortion law, I didn't know this until Ben Wickler told us this last week. The abortion law on the books there was fashioned in 1849. It is the governing, abortion's illegal. It's completely illegal in Wisconsin to this day. In a state that Democrats win by 53% of the vote, the governor did in this last election, right? And so the victory of I'm going to botch her name, Janet Protasewicz, I think is, if I got it right, is going to turn a 4-3 Republican court to a 4-3 Democratic court, and we'll hopefully be able to create some kind of sensible abortion regime there. We'll be able to, you know, Wisconsin's the most gerrymandered state in the country. You know, we regularly win 52% of the vote there, and we regularly win 33 to 35% of the legislative seats in Wisconsin. It's not really a democracy. And so we may be able to change all that now because of this single election that just took place. The consequence of this is significant. And I do think that, to your question, yes, people want to have this conversation. And I think what's important about having it is that people are scared. by the conversation, and you have to direct that fear into action and to let people stare at this and live with it and understand it and not be overwhelmed by it, and to understand it and to, and to have a way of, conceptualizing it and thinking it through and coming up with a place of where that's comfort for them. And because I think it does no good to run away from it either, because it is arguably the central thing driving, people to vote MAGA out. And certainly if you look at what happened in Tennessee just in the last couple of days, where these 3 state legislators who are probably going to be kicked out of the, expelled from the legislature because of a protest they were part of. They tried to go to work yesterday and their security cards that allowed them into the building were revoked unilaterally and they were basically prevented from going to their office, and they were essentially stripped of their ability to be an elected official just through an administrative fiat by the Speaker of the House. It's the most illiberal, undemocratic thing that one could possibly imagine. DeSantis has removed Democratic elected officials because somehow in the state constitution of Florida, who knows how this happened, there was the ability of the governor to remove elected officials, from their office that were elected by people. DeSantis has the ability to remove people. He's done it in Florida, and we're the right is flirting with a level of liberalism that really has no precedent in the history of the country. It's almost hard to imagine a greater betrayal of who we are and what America's been than what Trump has done. Even today, Trump, Alvin Bragg, to his credit, put in context that what Trump did was he cheated in the election. He used these illicit means to cheat. If Stormy Daniels had come forward in October of 2016, Donald Trump would have lost the election. I think there's no question about that in my mind. So what he did by illegally paying her off may have changed the history of the world. And Alvin Bragg, to his credit, talked about that today in his indictment about what they're really talking about is not him just cheating on business records. It's about him cheating in an American election. What is a higher crime in a democracy than cheating in an election? There is no higher crime in the Constitution, right? Which is crimes against democracy, right? Really is what that construct was about.
That's my idea.
Yeah, and so I think that Trump and the issue of his committing high crimes and the repeated high crimes that Republicans are committing against our democracy every day is we're obligated to talk to our friends and colleagues about this.
So our politics is so influenced by dark money and these ultra rich people, called oligarchs, for lack of a better word. How do we get them out of our democracy? And as someone put in the chat before, they turn it into an autocracy.
Well, I think we have to continue to have, as you did in Oregon, to innovate, to create, to strengthen your democracy by making it easier for people to vote, for example. I think all these issues have to become more central now to our politics. I think I talk a lot about becoming an information warrior and being loud, which I think is actually really important. And I wrote a whole piece on this today that cites Timothy Snyder, who some of you have already, his book on tyranny, which sits here on my desk and which I look at every day, about the concept of not obeying in advance. And I won't go through it now because we're getting to the end of time. But I think that part of what I wrote about today is that, not obeying in advance and not doing their work for them is not a passive action. It's an affirmative action. It's a step forward. And that every time that you write a postcard, that you do meetings like this, that you tweet, that you send an email to your 20 friends, that you engage in political discourse, right? You're making things better. You're taking an action. You're filling the void. You're preventing their noisiness on their side, Fox News, the dark money groups. You're making it harder for them to control the discourse every day. We are not intentional enough about getting louder and making it harder for them to bully us in the discourse. And if I can sort of, it's hard to believe it's 11 o'clock right here, but part of my journey on the red wave was that I became a little bit concerned about the fact that virtually every commentator in Washington fell for what was a Republican manipulated effort to convince commentators that a red wave was coming when it wasn't. And as somebody who's been here for 30 years and former TV producer, I mean, the fact that the entire media sort of fell and were bamboozled by these guys was just stunning to me. And it made me realize that even very sophisticated people that we all watch on TV, that we have enormous admiration for, are unaware of the nature of the conflict that we're really in right now, and are unconscious of the manipulation of our information systems by them, and how loud they are, and how they can bully us to believing things like fentanyl and Halloween candy is actually a thing, right? Like that, just through the sheer force of their malevolence and their noisiness. And I think this coming to a place in our society where we realize that we don't have information integrity, that the integrity of our information systems have been compromised, have been bullied, have been poisoned, whatever the language is really an important kind of thing that we have to develop a conversation around. What's happening with Twitter, right? What's happening with social media? I have a 17-year-old daughter, and just TikTok and the way that social media has created skyrocketing depression in young Americans. We need to be talking about this. This is really important stuff. And we're at the very early stages of these conversations. And that's going to be a lot of what I'm going to be working on in my work, to help create a greater understanding of the fact that we have to step outside of this red wave that's been put on top of us and liberate ourselves, right? You know, we have Stockholm syndrome a little bit as a whole country, and we have to step outside of this and to really go on offense, tell our story, go into the light, not into the darkness, respond to their negative sentiment with positive sentiment. And you know, I've changed the way that I communicate. I've gone through my own sort of, I think 80-90% of my writing and my tweets and everything are positive now, probably up from, you know, I did what everybody does. Look at these crazy people and all the stuff they're doing. I don't do that anymore, right? I don't want to promote Marjorie Taylor Greene. I don't want to spend the limited time I have communicating with people and reminding everybody about how terrible they are, because we all know it by this point, right? And I think that sometimes we dwell in this stuff a little bit. It's like watching a rubbernecking on a highway to see the car accident on the other side. I don't want to watch the car accident. I don't want to watch Marjorie Taylor Greene. Stop sending me tweets about her, right? And we have to liberate ourselves, I think, from sort of this fascination of their awfulness, and pull ourselves into this other headspace of, we're lucky to live in this remarkable country. You know, you guys live in a beautiful, those of you in Oregon, what a remarkable, beautiful state you live in. It's a little bumpy these days, but you're going to get through it. And you know, that we live in the greatest country in the history of the world, and we're so prosperous and we have so many opportunities. This is a remarkable time to be alive. And how we've allowed other people to tell us otherwise, to have us feel bad about our leaders, our country, our mission, our democracy, the great American project, our, you know, institutions, each other, is something that we have to become conscious that we can't allow that to happen. Because while they talk down America, we have to talk it up, right? Why they are put vitriol into our discourse, we have to tell people about how good everything is. This is a really big project, but every time you do it, it makes a difference. Because if the way I describe this is that I was in the war room in 1992. And when we think of the war room, it's like 20 sweaty kids drinking Red Bulls, right? Producing videos. Now we have to think of the war room as 4 million people getting up every day, proud patriots, all of you, and spreading a little bit of good news. And if 4 million people do that every day, we'll be louder than Fox News. And I think we have more power than we understand. We have more agency in this process than we understand. But we have to use it. Power only matters if you use it. And I think that I'm creating a permission structure for all of you to get loud and become information warriors and express the love of your country in the way that we all actually really have, in ways that don't feel swarmy or silly, but that are the thing that motivates you every day. And it's not hatred of them or fear of them. It's about the love of this place that we've all built together. And I think we can overcome them with that, right? I'd rather live in love than in fear. And I think we have work to do internally ourselves about how to fight them. I think we've been fighting them wrong a little bit, right? We can't out pessimist them. We can't be more dark than they are. We have to answer their darkness with light. And I know that sounds a little bit like crystals and other things floating through the air, but I actually, after having done this for 30 years, I actually really believe it to be the case of how we have to fight differently. And that's, join me in my Substack. It's free, right? You don't have, if you want to pay, it's fine, but if you just want to hang out with me for free. And I'm going there because I think we're building a powerful community to have these conversations. It's a powerful new platform. I'm aware that Twitter may be disappearing or becoming something less. We're never going to replicate what we have at Twitter. Something different is going to emerge. I think Substack is going to be part of that. And I think it's a very powerful tool. I've really enjoyed it. And so the water's warm. You're all invited to come hang out there, and thank you. And maybe if I could just say one last thing, and we'll go, is that just to say thanks. I know I went on a little bit long. I'm a little tired. It's been a crazy day. Congratulations, everybody. I think we won Chicago. I haven't checked since we've been on.
We did.
The Wisconsin win was a big deal, and it was the force. I want to just close with this idea of hopium, because and the reason the word hopium became a word during 2022 is that I was accused multiple times by various people of hopium, which is this merger of hope and a drug, right? Meaning that I was delusional. I mean, the implication of it is that it's irrational hope. I have a different take on what hopium is. Hopium is hope backed up by action and power, where you can make something happen that would not have happened otherwise. And that's what we did in 2022 together. We made something happen that nobody thought was going to happen through our good works and our power and our belief and our unwillingness to accept them and their dominance over us. We just did it in Wisconsin. We just did it in Chicago. There's going to be a mayor's race in Jacksonville, Florida in May that we're all going to have to now go run and go help out there. It's going to be the next collective battle for all of us. They should be very worried, because we've tapped into something deep and powerful together, which is all of us proud patriots going to work, putting our heads down, using these new tools, these new ways of making our democracy stronger. And, they should fear what we're building here together. And thanks to all of you for your being part of this. And, let's stick together. And I have some homework to do. I want to get back to you on that primary thing. I want to think about that and learn more about that. It's an interesting challenge. And that's it. Is that good? And by the way, I don't have an Oregon Pinot with me, but I do. It's a California Zen, and I'm gonna finish it here. I am a Pinot guy, so at some point we'll all get to drink some together, everybody.
We have a party in DC someday with you. How about that?
I'd rather come visit you, and let's go
Okay,
to.
well, if you come out, be sure and stay in
I
touch
know.
with
Let's
us.
go to. I want to go to Willamette Valley. I've never, go do a tour. We can just do a wine day together, and
Right
a
on.
hopium wine trip to Willamette Valley. That would be a
I
fun.
think that sounds fabulous. You are invited
Welcome
anytime.
anytime. Yeah. Thank
Okay,
you
everybody.
so much.
Simon,
It's
wait.
11 o'clock at this point. We really appreciate you being here tonight. and
Simon?
we're gonna follow
Yeah.
you. Thanks.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
We're gonna stop.
I gotta go. I'm gonna go,
Yep,
but you're
yep.
welcome to follow up. Just connect me.
Yep.
This amazing team that put this together. And thanks, everybody. And listen, go fight, win, be optimistic. Remember, Joe Biden's been a good president. The Democratic Party is strong. The country is better off. And now we're gonna go kick their butt 2024. Thanks.
Let's do it.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank
Simon.
you.